I think but it's still a very live question given how early. So having said all that, yes, many of them are interested in what the potential for efficiency is from an economic standpoint, but I think what comes out in all 5 of the case studies equally clearly is that for them there is a compelling academic hypothesis around.
Well, I understand the hypothesis, and I'm in higher ed where we have a lot of distance learning. No, a lot of distance learning and track records of doing a lot of that. That's different than K-12. So I'm just curious, I'm hearing this blended learning model, we want to ramp it out, but we don't really know yet how it works for the students. And yeah, I'm all for innovation. I'm like you, a hypothesis would seem that it makes sense, and watching young people and how they learn and access information. But I would hate for us to leave this room saying that this is where we all need to jump.
So here's what,
hold it out as models for public ed if we don't know yet, or at least by this, we don't know yet.
And we would never say that we know yet. And here's what the data can tell you so far, that we all know so far. That the schools with whom we're working, and maybe there's some schools that are doing blended learning that this is not the case. For the ones that we are intrigued by because of this data point, we're doing all this additional SRI research to really distill the impact of the blended aspect of the model on the academic performance. But what we know is, as a whole, the school is still performing. It's on trend to eliminate the achievement gap, or however you want to measure high academic performance. And there are a variety of ways to do that. But these schools are outperforming their local communities, in many cases outperforming the highest income schools in their states, et cetera, however it may be. And so what we know is, as a school, a combination of classroom instruction and blended learning, or online instruction, therefore blended learning, is continuing to perform well or improve, and therefore continuing to do their blended learning and doing some SRI research to be able to say, is it the pixie dust that just is our school that's making us perform well? And this blended component maybe is just a financial efficiency. It actually has no impact on the academic result. Or is it that our teachers are actually phenomenal, or they're crushing it in the classroom, and this blended learning may even be bringing down the report, but because what's happening in the classroom is so great, then this school is still performing. We don't know yet, and that's what some of the SRI research and some of this additional research needs to figure out, and will be great when it does. But I think what we do know, and what we feel confident knowing, is we're supporting schools that continue to perform or outperform themselves academically and hit academic metrics that we want them to hit. Therefore not doing an ultimate disservice by any means to the students. But we now need to figure out whether it's amazing teachers, amazing instruction, pixie dust, or the blended program. So I think that what I don't want us to do, and there are a lot of ways, but I just don't want us to say, until we have this precise information, we cannot even think about this as a viable option, or dismiss it and say it's just an academic or an operational efficiency. I want us to just be smart about the fact that we know, we hope, we will only support blended programs if they're not doing ultimately a disservice, and we want to start to distill that pixie dust. We want to know if that's the people, just amazing people, if it's the operational combination, or if it's the online content of it too.
And I'll just chime in that what was striking about all 5 of these models is that blended learning was never, let's just adopt blended learning. They had a very clear instructional vision, and blended learning played a role in that. And so I think it will be interesting to see what the evaluation comes out with, because how do you take that, how do you disentangle those things? But I think it is important for any school or district doing this to have a very strong instructional vision, and what you want for the students, and how can blended learning help make that real, rather than we're going to do a blended model. It's got to be an integrated part of a kind of broader vision.
How much training takes place prior to beginning the program?
Quite a bit, actually.
Prior to and every day.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think all the models were different is the short answer to your question, but I think, I think there's 3 parts to your question, or three ways that I'll answer just to think about. The first of which is what happens in the summer before. So I think for sure for all the models that started new, there were some fairly intensive pre-summer training. They all handled the question of in-year professional development differently, but they all have it in some form or fashion, whether it's time during the day or specific meetings carved out after school or what have you, but that's an important thing. The third thing, though, that I think is a really interesting question is, to what extent do you involve your teachers in the design of a blended model? So, especially if you believe that you learn by doing, I think that's a really powerful way to consider training. The models were all different, or the operators were all different in terms of how they did it, but I think there are lots of benefits to having the teacher's voice and the teacher's experience come through clearly in the design of the model. Not the least of which is this notion of it's a way for them to accelerate their learning and think about how they're actually going to implement it in the following year. But I think it's definitely one of the things that cannot be underestimated in general, is just the amount of training. And what I will say is that it comes out in a couple of the case studies, is the operators will tell you all teachers in their first year of blended learning are new teachers. Don't care how many years they've been in the classroom before that, this is a new ballgame. It really is. It's a totally different way of thinking.
So when you say training, are you also talking about the distinction in human capital type of person? Because I think of those as two different things. Not just training, but when you talk about a lab monitor, a non-certified teacher versus, specialized instructors, it's not trainable necessarily. It's a difference. It's a different person. And that's what I experienced doing one of these in the school was, you needed different faculty. You needed different staff. You had to, if you were going to really do it well, you had to trade people out. And that's part of why I think it's hard to do when you're transforming. I mean, that's one of the things you have to work through when you're doing this. So when you look at this and you talk about training, do you also include in that transition, different players? Because when you talked about, the Arthur Ashe rule, and you said, well, it was really a monitor. Well, it really wasn't. It was a monitor plus highly specialized teachers. So really, both from an operation cost, everything else, it's not really paraprofessionals running that. It really can often require a much higher level teacher than a lower level teacher, to speak to his point about needing someone, not just to keep them paying attention to the computer when they're little kids. I get that. But when they hit a wall, or for the children who the adaptability isn't sufficient to learn, they're all
Those are
those
two
issues.
they are two different, but I mean, do
Yeah.
treat training and professional development separately from the overall human capital
Like, who
model.
are the people?
There's
Yeah.
actually a lot in the
Because
case
I think
studies
that's
on the
big.
human capital
Okay,
model.
okay.
As separate from, once you have the people, what kind of training they get, yeah.
The fundamental commonality sort of between those two, though, is the access to data, understanding how to use data, implement data.
And what do you do about it?
Make data actionable and things like that is
And
common.
and what do you do about the kids who, and I wonder if you saw this in any of these case studies, couldn't learn on a computer? Well, where do they go in the lab rotation model, station rotation? What happens to them? Because there's a percent of children who can't learn well that way. So what did these schools do? Had they gotten that far enough into it, do you know, or?
I don't know that there were students, I don't remember hearing that there were students who couldn't learn well. I mean, you certainly adapt the programs
I know
you're
that,
using,
yeah,
and
yeah.
you know, but I don't remember hearing, oh, there's students who are not, who can't use the computer.
Especially those generations of kids who just walk around with it.
But it's not that, it's the
Right.
it's the content,
But
the
it
way
depends
they
on how
process
this-
information. I mean, there's certain percentages.
It depends on how they implement RTI and special education.
Right.
And each one of
In
them
addition.
manages that. As a charter school, you manage it differently, so and we didn't have that in there, we can't.
And so maybe Ash was pulling out those kids.
Yeah.
You know what I mean, when you talked about pulling out with teachers.
In some cases, yeah. I don't think any, I do know what you mean. I don't think any of the models had like a specific answer to the question of, well, we have a group of kids that we've identified as being unable to learn on the computer, and therefore we're going to do X.
Do X,
Yeah,
yeah.
and it will be- I mean,
It's
like-
maybe early,
Yeah. It is what it is.
Adaptability gets you halfway there.
Right, I mean,
Yeah, I think we're at time. This is a
The
great.
case studies are available on our
Oh,
website.
yes.
We can email them.
Yes, absolutely. So msdf.org, so it's just our initials, the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation, .org/blended learning. And they'll all 5 of the case studies plus an introduction are out there.
Give Cheryl and Kathy